Hello, I'm the Ghoul Boy. Welcome to the Eschaton podcast. Here with our special guest, resident gender expert, depression expert, overall fantastic man.
Hello.
Dom.
Hi, I'm Dom. I am trans and gay.
So controversial, yet so brave.
And mentally ill. And I pride myself on that.
It's honestly, it's an accomplishment in this day and age.
It is. It's on my CV, actually.
It's on your CV.
Yeah, I
Very
wrote it
nice.
down on my CV.
Very nice, very nice. It gets you hired.
Oh, 100%.
Gets you hired, gets you fired.
No.
They can't.
Because then I'm like, that's like discrimination. You have to legally hire me regardless, or else you're homophobic, transphobic, and ableist?
Wow!
Oh, yeah, I could say ableist.
You could say ableist. You're neurodivergent.
You're a divergent.
Neurodivergent.
I'm a little bit quirky.
I'm kind of quirky.
I'm kind of quirky. Yes.
So welcome to the podcast. This is our first episode of the podcast.
I'm truly honored to be here as guest number one.
Very special.
Like, you're starting off at a peak here.
Honestly, it's only downhill.
It's only
from here.
downhill from this point.
Even within the podcast.
Oh,
this
yeah.
will probably be the peak of the podcast.
Yeah, 100%. And everybody that comes on after is gonna
Trash by comparison.
By comparison, no one will beat me. No. But that's okay.
Exactly.
That's how it goes.
And before we get into discussion, I have to acknowledge our sponsors.
Us.
Banana Muffin Men.
Now that we're men, we can do anything.
Banana Muffin Men.
We made these ourselves.
We did.
From scratch.
From scratch.
Yeah.
No, Bready Crocker.
No.
Bready Mocker.
Oh, fuck.
Betty Cocker.
Oh, hell yeah. We grew the bananas ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We bought vanilla beans and made our own vanilla extract.
We
for
juiced
it.
them.
We juiced them.
We juiced the vanilla.
Yeah, so I know you guys are jealous, but it's okay. You can make
And
it.
then Monster Piss. Gold edition.
Bottoms up. And the double laps.
Not actually a sponsor.
No, I wish.
We wish.
Sponsored by Piss Kink.
sponsored by Piss Kink Ultra Gold Shower Edition.
And the double laps.
Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. Oh, so sorry.
So, who is Dom?
What do you want to know? That's a very broad question.
What is your foundation of being? What do you think is a word that describes Dom best?
I've heard a lot. A word that I've heard multiple times to describe me has been soft. But I feel like soft can be taken as like, God, you're so soft, you know? But I pride myself in being like soft, you know?
Soft boy.
A soft boy, one may say. I don't know. I mean...
But you're ready to fight.
Oh, at all times. Be soft, but be ready. I don't know if you've seen that meme with the bunny and it has a knife. Be soft, but be ready.
I've not seen this meme.
This is a really good meme.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just like living life, you know, going to school.
Living large.
Living large.
What do you study at school?
I study computer science.
Hacker?
I'm a little bit of a hacker. Yeah. I don't know. I don't really do much, but what I do. Do.
You said doo-doo.
Anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just like living life, you know? Doing school, going to work, seeing friends, making muffins, you know?
Making muffins.
Making muffins, making moves.
Living large.
Living large. So, you know, I don't know. I'm just like existing, you know? Just, yeah.
Soft boy. I like that.
Yeah.
That's a good word.
Thank you.
And it's like, I think of like the foam, you know those like that foam stuff you used to see on TV that you could form into different shapes? It was like all malleable and shit.
No idea what you're
with
talking
like the little pebbles in it. I'll put it on the screen.
Okay.
In post.
In post. So this is what he's talking about.
This is what I'm talking about.
Remember? Yeah.
But that's what I think of when I think of you.
That's kind of epic.
It's pretty epic.
It's pretty epic. Yeah.
So you're a trans man.
I am a trans man.
What are your pronouns?
He, him.
He, him.
I'm a he, him.
He, him, himbo.
Yeah, used to be they, them.
Used to be they, them.
But then I was like, I'm lying to myself. after a while of figuring my shit out, we're a he him now. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did you come to the conclusion that you were a guy deep down?
Long story for that one. I mean, even like in high school, like grade 7, I used to wear like 2 sports bras. And I was like, everyone does this. This is like a normal woman thing to do. It was not. I was just binding.
Yeah.
But like with what I had, right? And like I sort of knew all along that I was trans. You know, I would tell people like, yeah, I'm probably a guy, but like I don't think I'm going to do anything about it, you know? And then when I like kind of learned more about non-binary stuff, I was like, this feels more comfortable because it seems more like palatable, you know? It's like, I'm not like fully trans, even though like non-binary people are like trans people for sure. Like depends on how they want to identify, that's fine. But like for me, I was like, this is easier than like coming to terms with who I actually am. And then after a while, I was like, maybe I should just like try out he, him pronouns and like identify as a guy. And I was like, this feels so much better. Like this feels very me, very more comfortable in my own skin kind of thing. So it took a solid like 8-9 years to figure that out, but we got there in the end.
You got there. It's like, that makes sense because it's sort of like a smoother transition, right?
Yeah,
because it's like going straight from to he, him.
Yeah.
Would be like, I don't know, like a hard flip, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like, a lot of people do that, but a lot of people, I know a few people who went by, like, transition to, like, she, her, but then now use, like, she, they kind of thing. And I love to see it. I mean, like, I'm all for fuck the binary kind of thing. Like,
it's a malleable.
It's a very malleable thing. I mean, like, gender is so fake. It's a social construct, you know? So just, like, do whatever you want, you know? It doesn't need to be so, like, black and white, you know? Just, like, whatever feels right for you. And gender is a very fluid thing, in my opinion, you know? Like, I don't think, for me, at least, like, I know that I'm a trans man, but I don't know, I might go by, like, he, they at some point. You don't know, you know? Because I feel like it changes over time. Like, as you change, your gender might change, too. And I think that's, like, fully valid and fully, like, acceptable to my standards, one may say.
To your standards.
To my
Our resident
standards.
expert on gender.
Correct.
Laid down the rules right there in case you missed it. But yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I feel like, I don't know, there's so much flexibility in identity because it changes over time, right?
Yeah.
And
for sure.
I think the interesting thing about it is like there's sort of, I don't know, it's often conceived of as like there's like 2 poles, right? Like male and female. When I think like in reality it's more of just like those are just 2 points on this like big like 3-dimensional graph, you know?
Yeah, like male and female are like the x-axis, and I feel like non-binary is like the z, and then like everybody else kind of falls on the y and the z altogether. I mean, I love math, so when you talk about gender on a graph, I'm like, I'll make this happen. Like that is so good because like even with non-binary, some people consider being non-binary as like between male and female kind of thing, but in reality, it's more like genderless, so it isn't even on that spectrum anymore. It's on its own different spectrum. And even being non-binary, it's more like an umbrella term, right? It can be like gender fluid or like agender, and there's like so much like variety in it that I don't think that they all belong on like this one like single line.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not like that. It's a very 3D planes going through each other kind of thing. Like we got some parabolas going. We got an ellipsoid going too,
ellipsoid.
Obviously, right? So I don't know.
Yeah,
I feel like it's too strict.
It's like a Mobius strip.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't need to be so concrete. Like it's been sort of told in all of like Western civilization, you know, where it's like man or woman, that's it, you know.
And I think it's like sometimes there's like arguments made as like, well, the reason like it exists as a construct is like for reproduction purposes. But then it's like I see more like queers getting married than like cis-het people getting married and having children, right?
And like and they have happier marriages mostly.
Oh yeah.
100%. Are you kidding me?
Because there's more like, I think the interesting thing about it is there's like when you make male and female like 2 poles on the end of a spectrum, it's like it exacerbates the differences, right? And like there's a certain level of difference that you want like in a relationship, but it's like when it becomes over exaggerated. It's like then you get into like the toxic masculinity, like the misogyny, like internalized misogyny and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's even with like the male and female thing. It's like that whole thing that was happening like when it was like, oh, the old ball and chain, It's like you shouldn't think that your wife is like holding you down. Like that doesn't make any sense. But I feel like with queer relationships, it's like there's so much more understanding because like there's some kind of like similar experience in your life of like being queer in a society that's mostly where the default is straight cis, whereas like with a cis straight relationship, it's like you're a man, I'm a woman, we should do this because like that's the law of nature, whatever. But then it's like the differences get in the way almost, It's like you can only do certain things and you can do these things. Like men can't paint their nails and women can't whatever. Like it just, there's so much divide in it because like we created this huge divide that doesn't need to be there, and then it creates these like unhappy relationships because it's like you don't relate to them anymore. It's like, oh, my boyfriend just plays video games all day. It's like, okay, he's not the one for you because you don't have like similar interests. So just like, I don't know, I feel like there's a very big separation that creates so much like tension and like,
because it's like these strict boxes.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And like me as a cis male, right? Like I think that I've like experienced some of that sort of like boxification, so to speak,
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's like the getting like comfortable with like the different sides of yourself, because it's like a multifaceted thing, like personality for everybody, right? And it's like it just depends on the level of constriction that you put on yourself in terms of being able to change. And I think that that's like, to go back to what you were saying about this like evolution, right? Like that ability to change is like super valuable. And I think like to tie that into relationships, like I think the goal of any relationship, whether it's like, two cis people, two queer people, a cis and a queer person, like any combination should be on that like ability to grow and change and promote that in each other, right?
For sure. And I think it's also with queer relationships is more based on personality, I find, than in my experience. A lot of the straight cis relationships that I've seen have been very like looks wise and sort of like they fit the mold of what I think I want, and therefore it's the right person for me. Whereas I feel like with queer relationships, it's a lot more like the talking phase. I feel like it's a lot more in depth, and like trauma bonding, for example, is a very big thing with queer people. Like even with friends, it's like I've had multiple friends where like the first time I hang out with them, I'm like, here's all my trauma, and they're like, awesome, here's mine, and then like we're besties kind of thing, where I feel like with straight people, it's all very surface level. I mean, it's a very big generalization, obviously.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to generalize on every single straight person that's ever existed that they are like this and that kind of thing. Like every queer person is the same, but there is a kind of like common theme across them both, I find. Yeah,
I think that is like, I definitely do notice that the trauma, like I think there's positives and negatives to those sort of like trauma bonding thing, right?
Yeah.
Like there's like on one hand, like there's like extremes on both sides, like both sort of not sides, but like the division, to even make the division with like the cis relationships and like the queer relationships, it's also like a spectrum between them,
for
right?
For sure.
And so it's like on one hand, like I do feel like those generalizations are helpful in terms of like talking about things, right? Because when everything's so ambiguous, it's difficult to talk about anything, right?
For sure.
But I definitely, I get what you're saying. I do feel like that's a thing for sure. Like the physicality or like the sort of idealization, right? Because like when you're looking for like an ideal, whether that's personality or like physicality, right? You're setting your expectations for something that's not going to deliver, right? Because no one's like a perfect image of what you consider them.
No one's perfect ever.
Exactly.
There will always be flaws in someone, and I feel like it's learning how to deal with that as well in relationships. I don't know. I mean, I'm not one... When it comes to romantic relationships, I have no experience, so I don't have much to say on that.
Another episode, we'll get a resident relationship expert.
And that is not me. But yeah, I mean, and it's also like the generalizations can also be very harmful as well, Because like... Even when you talk about straight relationships, that could be two trans people, you know? So it's like, it's very, like you were saying, a very ambiguous thing and still a spectrum all in all. I mean, everything's a spectrum in the end, in my opinion, at least.
It's all spectrums, and in 3D space, no less.
And maybe even 4D space, we might go crazy.
Woo.
Woo.
So talking about the 4D space, let's talk about some specific points on that space. So, what do you think, like, I feel like there's more and more acceptance of, like, in terms of pronouns, like, not just he, him, not just she, her, but also including they, them.
Yeah.
But there's been some discussion, but less, like, it's less mainstream still, like neo-pronouns, right? And I think there's a lot more, like, mainstream pushback towards, like, in terms of, like, the need to refer to people by their pronouns, right?
Yeah.
The self-selected pronouns. And I think there's, like, a wider acceptance these days of, like, they, them as, like, being like, okay, you know, we'll do the they, them. Like, most people are going to be fine with, like, there's still going to be some people who are just
obviously,
like, you fucking
they, them, what the fuck
them,
is it? You know?
Exactly. Like, Apache attack helicopter looking at us.
Exactly,
like,
yeah. That's always going to be a thing, honestly, I think.
I agree. I think it's like, but I think that's getting, that minority of people who are, like, really intolerant towards pronouns is getting, like, less and less.
Yeah, for sure.
But I would still say there's, like, more pushback towards, like, neopronouns. Like, what's some examples of neopronouns? Like, the ones with the X's, like, they, them.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, they as well. It is also a neopronoun. I don't know anyone personally who uses neopronouns, and I know even for me when I first, like, came to hear about neopronouns, I was like, that's fucking stupid, you know? But then I was like, who cares, man? Like, if someone wants to use them, go for it, you know? And it's like, I feel like right now pronouns are the least of our worries when it comes to, like, the trans community, you know, like, with so many, like, trans women getting murdered and stuff, and especially, like, BIPOC people and, like, that are trans, that are getting, like, killed at a really big rate, you know? It's like, when it comes to pronouns, I'm just like, okay, and if I know for, like, it takes time to adjust to it, for sure. You know, even my friend uses all pronouns. Even now, I still, like, default to she. But then I'm like, oh, I forget sometimes, you know? And, like, so you get used to it after a while, you know? So it's like, when it comes to neopronouns, I feel like once you're in, like, contact and have a friend or someone close to you who uses neopronouns, I feel like it becomes so much easier. So as someone who, like, doesn't have anybody that I know who uses them, it's like, it's hard to have, like, an opinion on it, because, like, it doesn't involve me almost, you know? It's like, I'll respect anybody for whatever they want to do, you know? Like, that's not up to me to decide, you know? So I think if it makes someone feel comfortable and that feels right to them, then I'm like, go off, do it. Like, I want people to feel comfortable, you know? But I know that, like, even with the people who are, like, they, them, isn't real pronouns, whatever, they'll see neopronouns and shit their pants. They're like, oh my god, what the fuck is even that, you know? Whereas, like, I feel like also neopronouns are right now, very closed in the queer community. Like, a lot of people who are not in the queer community haven't, like, heard about it or seen it, and if they do, they're like, that's fake, whatever. Like, I don't even care, you know? So it's hard to see how the world will react to it as well. Yeah. Because it's not very out there now.
I think it's interesting, you know, you bring up the sort of, like, the reaction to those, right? Like, I think I see this sometimes on, like, queer philosophical political pages, right? Like, Delusion Thembo. Have you ever heard of that account?
No.
Oh, it's like this far left, like,
classic
person, like, cat, like, it's like they're like a cat boy culture, like,
okay, iconic.
They them like icon, like, got written about in the New York Times and shit like that. Yeah, like,
shit. Okay.
They've sort of made, like, a big splash in, like, the sort of, like, Instagram, like, political community, like, niche philosophical political community.
Classic.
And I think that there's, like, it makes me think of them because there's sort of, like, this push that I've been seeing, like, recently to sort of, like, make the like biggest reaction possible from like the opposing side, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that, and that like neopronouns come to mind in terms of like that sort of shocking aspect to them, right? Because it is very something that's closed off, and I think there's like I've been seeing more and more this approach. It's like, you know, instead of like the desire to try to integrate with the mainstream, you know, and like I think that that's something that has been a push that I've sort of seen like from the outside of like the you know, the queer community, this like sort of push for acceptance onto mainstream platforms like Instagram, adding the pronouns thing.
Yeah.
And I think that you're right, it is sort of a less important issue, but I see like sometimes more energy being devoted to those sort of like niche issues, right?
Yeah.
And
it's easier.
It's easier, and I also think it's like there's some satisfaction that comes from like creating like a big splash, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that can like it sort of like shock people and like rile people up, right? Which I think has value sometimes, but other times distracts from like more important issues, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time with like that whole like big splash kind of vibe, it's really just queer people existing and like far right people being like, what the fuck, you can't do that, you know? So when there is those like small victories of like being able to like put your pronouns on Instagram, whatever, even though that's so small, for someone it might be really important, you know? And it's even like when it comes to dating apps, for example, if you put like non-binary as your gender, it asks you, who do you want to be grouped with? Like, who do you want to be seen as, basically, like man or woman? So even if you put like non-binary, it's like, okay, cool, but what do people see? Like, what do you want people who, like, do you want someone who's looking for a man or a woman? But it's like, but I'm neither. You know, and it's like, and for that as well, it's like, when it comes to like neopronouns or something, it's like that, it's that block, you know? And it's like, being able to break through that is a big accomplishment, and it feels good when you're like more included in things. So it is like a less intense issue, because like no one's lives are at risk. But I also do think that if we are able to like implement that kind of stuff and be more accepting of trans people, then like the bigger issues such as like murder of trans people will become less prevalent almost, because it's gonna just like force the acceptance into like mainstream media and main society, you know, society.
We live in a society.
We live in a society. In a society.
In a society.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Pronouns are it's a deep conversation to have, because if you look at it from both sides, it's like, from my side as a queer person, it's like, yeah, okay, whatever. But then other people are like, no, it's she or her, or they're like I saw a video, it was like when she has pronouns and then dips out, and I'm like, what do you mean? Everybody uses pronouns. It's something. It's like part of a language, you know. So it's like, I don't know.
It's fuckery.
It's fuckery. It's all fuckery. But in the end, it does, for me, it doesn't make much of a difference, you know, but for a lot of queer people, it's very important to them, you know? I mean, even if when I get misgendered, I get really upset, obviously, because, like, as someone who's, like, very female presenting, oh my god.
Is it already 6:50?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have to put the podcast on pause and return to this. In a bit.
6.5 hours later.
We're back.
We're back and we're better than ever.
We're back and we're better than ever. Thank you for that short commercial break. I don't know how my hair is right now, so I gotta hoodie up.
Hoodie up.
So yeah, where were we? We were discussing. We had finished pretty much talking about neo pronouns.
Yeah, I think we were ready to.
I think we were ready to move on.
Yes.
So the next piece on the docket.
Yes.
Is related to that. Quebec gender documentation, specifically Bill 2.
Yes.
So Bill 2, basically, from my understanding, will create two separate designations on government documents, one for gender and one for sex.
Yeah.
Or the assigned sex at birth.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's like, if you're a trans person and you get gender affirming surgery, then you can put your sex and your gender as like male or female, because it's like what they define sex as is like your like sexual organs and like basically what you look like naked, you know, which is like what they're doing it to like help trans people feel more inclusive, because then you can say that you're a man or a woman, but like even if you're not actually a man or a woman, you know. And Quebec thought that they were doing something like really like poggers here. They were like, we're about to change the fucking game.
They were like we bad bitches, we progressive.
And then every trans person was like, no, oh my god, don't do this, because it's basically just outing people, and it's saying that to make your sex what you actually are, you have to get surgery, which a lot of people can't afford or don't necessarily want to do, because you don't have to get the surgery to be trans, you know? So it's like, it's basically, like, you know, a bunch of people are always like, oh, well, what's in your pants? Like, you're a guy, but what's in your pants? You know, I know I've had that happen recently, you know? And it's like, that's such an uncomfortable thing to have to talk about, let alone like disclose on like government issue documentations, you know? It's like, it's transphobic almost. Yeah. In a way that it's like,
and it creates that same binary, right? Like the two poles that we were talking about before.
Because like you have the option to be put as non-binary, but then it's like, oh, but your gender's non-binary, but your sex is male, you know, or your sex is female, and it's just like, it's still putting you in that box, and like, you don't want to be known as trans all the time. It's not who you are. It's like a part of you, you know? And
it removes that fluidity that you were talking about before, right? Like the people go through constant changes in terms of like their gender identification. And I think like, yeah, creating that divide only like separates more, right? And also it like cuts, like, I don't know how the designations like currently work, because on your driver's license right now it's like male or female, right? There's like that binary already set up. I don't even know how that works for like intersex people to begin with.
That's the thing, right? As well, because right now I think you can put non-binary on your driver's license, or it's like NA, like non-applicable, whatever, and you can get it changed. Like if I wanted to go and legally get, like, because legally, by law, I am still a woman. Like, it's a funny thing to me. It's like, by law, I'm a lady, but in reality, I'm not, you know? And I can get that changed if I want to. But then it's like, putting all that effort in, and it's like, what if it changes at some point? You know, what if I'm non-binary at some point, you know? And it's like, I don't know if you can do that without getting surgery right now. I don't know. I honestly don't know the logistics.
We didn't do enough research on
this. We didn't, but we're just going to talk about it, because that's what it is.
We have important opinions on topics that we don't know anything about.
That we know very little amounts on. Indeed.
Well, we know some things. We know some things.
But in the end, the bill itself is stupid, because it's separating, it's making sex so much more important than it needs to be. You know, and what you brought up with like intersex people, you know, it's like, at that point you're forcing them to be one or the other, you know. And even if an intersex person identifies as a male or a female, whatever, that's their prerogative, you know. But I feel like making like your passport and your driver's license put like what if you get stopped by the cops, you know, and then it's like, oh, it says you're a man but you're a woman, what the fuck? And then it's like, it pushes hate crimes. Like, oh my god, cops, ACAB, first of all, definitely gonna have like some kind of influence on that, like on traffic stops and just like arrest, whatever. It's so much more common than if that happens for like violent acts to be like brought upon, especially with like trans women and trans women who are like also like POC, you know. It's like it forces that like distinction, you know. And it's like, even if like you can fully pass,
it creates a bias nonetheless.
It does, exactly. And it like makes you be like, oh, this person is trans, instead of being like, this is just a person, you know. I don't know. And
I think like the only real reason I could see for that, like, to be knowledge to like a cop, for instance, is like, you know, how they talk over like radio chatter, like, we're looking for a male,
right,
30 years old, wearing a white shirt, you know. It's like, that's the only application that I could see like that being like used for, right? Like,
and even then
it's like it's not going to like help, right? Like let's say like someone, you know, robbed a bank and they're on the run and they're trans. It's like, how is that going to assist them, right? Like
They're
it's
a trans person.
even-
Like, what does that mean?
Or even if
You
it's
know?
just like they just have like mail on their information sheet from the government, right? It's going to be less informative if they're like a trans woman and they read off mail.
Yeah.
Which I mean, like, honestly, do we really want anyone getting caught for crimes?
No. Defund the police. Anyway.
But yeah, I feel like it adds like nothing.
No, it
right?
doesn't.
Like it has never been necessary for the government to know
Anything.
my gender.
Government needs to know nothing.
Government needs to know nothing. Do not tread on me.
Like, the government should only know my social insurance number. Mm-hmm. And, like, maybe my address to, like, send me things. And, like, my bank account so they can send me money.
Bring on the Skrilla.
Like, yo, Daddy Trudeau, send it.
Ayo.
But I'm also, like, it's such a useless thing to have.
I know, right? Like
It's so useless, you know?
I think like if like we're to propose an alternative, right? Like a constructive alternative, just remove it entirely.
Yeah.
Like
No one has gender now.
why do we need to be gendered within the government identified sphere, right?
Right.
Like that's I feel like it's one of those issues where it's like a very like it's a personal thing that only affects like your interpersonal relationships
And maybe medical.
and maybe medical.
But it's like,
and that's
even
like
then, just ask.
yeah, and that's a
You know?
whole different sphere
Yeah.
than the government, right? Like
Right.
I've never like gone into a doctor's office and they're like, "All right, let me see your government ID so we can know this information about you."
Right?
They like ask you, right? It's like
Exactly.
they don't take your like height from the driver's license. They measure
Because everyone
you.
lies on that.
Exactly.
I'm not 6'3". I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I did not lie
He
on my
is
driver's
6'3".
I'm not. I'm 5'11".
Basically 6 foot.
Basically 7'2".
So,
If my rounding is correct.
if the rounding is correct, 7 foot. True. But yeah, I think that's like the best alternative is like if we're changing anything about identification, just axe it
Toss
out
it
the window.
Right? 'Cause even when you go to like the hospital, like if you're going in for a checkup, they only need to know like your bits. They don't care about your gender necessarily, you know? And it's like if I go in, okay, I can just talk about it. They're not gonna like look at my ID and be like, okay, so because it says this, I'm gonna assume that you have these parts, which for a lot of people is not the case, you know. So it's just like it's just so intrusive for no reason.
Exactly.
You know, and the only parts that does matter has nothing to do with your government issued ID at all. You know.
Exactly. Like I feel like the medical side of things and I don't feel like there's really any reason to have it like those classifications made. Like there's specific things like if they were like if someone gets sent to prison, right? Like it's like, oh, we got to separate the men and the women. But that's like
But even then, that's a whole other issue.
that's a whole other issue,
Right.
you know? And that's like a very specific case by case thing. It's
Yeah.
like most people don't go to prison. Why do we have it on everyone's ID,
Right.
right? Like
That's the thing, and even then, it's like depending on the person as well. You know, like some trans women might be fine going to a men's prison if they're forced there, but most won't because
Exactly.
oh my god, the violence. Oh
Yeah.
my god, the hate crimes.
It'd be
you know?
like it's worse. Like
It's worse.
Exactly.
And like a trans man, then there's that whole aspect of it, right? That's like a whole other huge can to open there, you know?
Exactly. And it's like so I think honestly we should abolish it. That's my opinion.
We should abolish the government.
We should abolish the government, gender, and
Prisons. And cops.
And cops.
All in one go.
I really like the idea of egoist anarchist society.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
I like that.
I want to read some Max Stirner.
You should.
Yeah.
You should. I don't know anything about it, so I can't put anything into this conversation.
But just for the audience to know.
Just for the audience to know.
I'm interested in it. Comment below in the description. Like, comment, subscribe.
Click that bell. Ding.
Ding! And tune in for more, which is coming right now.
Right now.
So, I think that sort of discussion about, government enforced gendering
Yeah.
and like, you know, the opposition to it, the abolishment of gender, as we've put it, brings to mind like the topic of identity politics, right? Like, there's a lot of like, I would say buzz or like importance placed upon like how we identify as like, especially amongst young people, right? Like, I feel like that's a very much like a part of Gen Z culture, millennial culture as well.
Yeah.
About like, how do we identify, making that like a core aspect of how we engage with the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of discussion over this, and there's a lot of different positions, so we're not going to be able to cover them all.
Yeah, obviously.
But I think it's like interesting to tie that in. It's like, how much should, you know, boxes be put around these different identities, right? Like, we're talking about gender as like a fluid concept, something that evolves over time. And I think like there's a lot of weight put onto like how you identify, which is like, on one hand, it can help people figure out who they are, right? For sure. It can, like, you know, these boxes existing is like good because it gives you like a sort of waypoint, right, to what you feel like you are. But then there's the issue of like getting stuck in those boxes, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, with boxes like that, it can make you feel like you're not alone as well. Like, I know, for me, when I found out that there were non-binary people, or like that there were trans people, it made me feel a lot less like crazy almost, you know, because I was like, why am I feeling this way when everybody I know has never had these feelings, you know? Like, talking to my friends and being like, you hate having like breasts, right? Like, you want to cut them off at some point, right? And all my friends being like, what the fuck are you talking about, you know? But like, having that box and that identity of, this is what a trans person is, and like relating to that kind of gives you like this safe space. But then, like you were saying, it's like breaking out of that, you know? And it's like, I know with me, when I was like figuring out my gender and stuff, it was like, I don't want to identify as a trans man in case I'm wrong, and then I'm stuck there, and then I make a fool out of myself and like make a bad name for trans people. You know, when in reality, obviously the signs were there from the very start, like that I was a trans man from the beginning, you know?
Like the imposter syndrome.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like, the whole box thing also like ties in with like gender roles and stuff, and like pink is for lady and blue is for man and stuff, you know, and like this idea of like passing and stuff, you know, it's like that is so enforced in these boxes of like, you're a woman, you're a man, you know, and it's like it can be very harmful, because I feel like you should only want to transition like medically if that's what you want, you know, instead of being like, I want other people to see me.
Yeah, that like societal
way.
pressure.
Exactly.
Right?
And like, I want to look like a man when there is no such thing as looking like a man. There is no man to look like, you know? It's like the labels help you kind of figure out what you want, but so many people don't need the labels. You know, like I know someone who is like, I'm not a guy or a girl, I'm just me, you know? And like, by definition, that's like non-binary, but they don't want to identify like that. So that's just who they are, you know? So it's like, it can be helpful, but also harmful at the same time, you know?
Yeah, and I think that there is like that sense of security, right? That comes along with like identifying as something. Yeah. And I think it's like for me, like I identify like as a cis male, you know, but it's really like, because it's easy, right? And there's like a certain level of, I don't know, it just seems like to further, I don't really feel the urge to get pulled in another direction. Yeah. Right? Even though it's like, I don't like the idea of these boxes, you know? And I think it is like, there's like two reasons that people like put themselves in those boxes. I think essentially like the sense of security that comes with it, and along with that like sense of security, like identification with a group. Yeah. You know, like belonging in that sense. And then also like for a lot of people probably convenience, right? Because it's just like those boxes exist before you're born. Exactly. And you're able to like, it's a lot more work to explain yourself as not being like in a box.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like predefined for you.
Exactly. And I think that that's like an interesting societal problem. Like it's so difficult to not identify as anything, right? Like to just be yourself. Like there's like this Kierkegaard quote, like if you name me, you negate me, right? But then it's like which I think is true in like a very deep way, right? Like as soon as you put a name to something, it removes some of the essence of fluidity or flexibility that's like inherent in like being a person and being alive, right? But it also like there's a big utility to that. Like like naming yourself or identifying yourself as this like makes it convenient to draw those like social connections with other people. And I think that's like the biggest thing is like it does come down to like how you relate to other people based on like the box that you put yourself in. But then it's like a whole nother issue of like having to pull yourself out of that box if you feel yourself shifting, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. I think the boxes are needed for like a lot of people, but I think being able to change is what's hard. Is that once you put yourself in this box of being like, I'm a trans man, or I'm straight, or I'm gay, whatever, then it becomes so difficult to change that up, you know? Like, I know for me, for the longest time, I was like, I'm a lesbian. And now I'm like, psych guys, just kidding. I'm a dude and I like everybody, you know? And that can be very difficult because I came out when I was 12, you know? So it's like this idea that people have had about me is now completely changed, you know? And that is also very difficult because I identify myself so much and like tied most of myself to these labels, you know? Whereas now I don't, because it was so hard to break out of it because I made it so important to me. Whereas now it's like, hey, yeah, I'm a trans man for now. Who knows what's going to happen, you know? Like there's certain things that I know that I want. Like I want to go on hormones, you know? That's not going to change for me, whether or not I identify as non-binary or a trans man or gender fluid or whatever. Like all that matters to me right now is that I'm not a woman, you know, and
You want that testosterone.
I want that testy.
The testy running through his veins.
I want that testosterone.
Anyway.
But yeah, I think it's like what we need to do as like a society is improve. We knocking art down.
Yeah, it's okay.
We need to improve
the get up.
we need to improve the get up. But we also need to improve like the ability to move between boxes, right? Like because it is like there's like people want to categorize other people, right? Because it makes life easier.
Yeah.
But I think like the ideal category is like flexibility.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think that that's like something that really we as a society have to like adapt to is like the flexibility of like identity and being able to change and like shift who you are as a person. Because there's this pervasive idea that, you know, like people never change.
Yeah.
You know, which just isn't true.
No, exactly.
Like people change on a daily basis, right? And it's like we were talking about with relationships, it's good to change, you know, in the direction that you want to, of course. Like there's like I think a positive and negative towards change, right? Like someone can change for the worse, someone can become a dickhead, you know, and
kind of stop how shitty.
Yeah, people can become shitty people, but people can also become like nicer people,
exactly,
right?
Yeah,
and I think that that's like something that people are hesitant to ascribe because they don't want to have to deal with this increased complexity in their relationships, right?
For sure.
But I think that that's like a really fundamental shift that needs to happen is that like we need to start accounting for this flexibility in people, you know? And I think that inflexibility, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, like, or like philosophical spectrum or gender spectrum or any spectrum, like inflexibility ends up making life like a lot harder.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
Like no matter where you're at in your life, like if you aren't flexible with yourself and other people, you're gonna run into problems.
You break.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
And the thing with, I feel these boxes and labels that we put on ourselves are so inflexible because I feel like they were originally used to separate. It's like it's me and then there's them. You know, like with all this like homophobia and transphobia, it's like I put you in this box. I know that I hate you and I hate your people. You know, and like with the racism too, it's just like it's us and then others. You know, and that's I feel like the main purpose of these labels and these boxes was because it was like, if you're in that box, I know that I don't like you, you know? Whereas this flexibility is so opposite to that, you know? Where it's like, everyone kind of fits in everything, you know? Everyone can go wherever they want, but then it's no longer like, yeah, but I don't know if I hate you now, you know? And I don't know if, like, you go against what I believe in, you know? It's like, it's completely opposite that, which is like, well, it needs to be, but it's so difficult because so many people still use these boxes to separate and create a divide of what is good and what is bad. You know, when in the end, it's all we just are in like togetherness. One big box, little boxes that everyone can just kind of walk around on. You know?
Exactly, and I think like that brings up like a whole like value judgments nest that I will dig into in further discussions with the camera. But because I feel like there's a lot of interesting things there, you know, in terms of like how do we make like judgments about like right and wrong? How do we like know what to oppose and what not to oppose, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's like a whole like Pandora's box of topics,
sure,
right?
For sure.
But I think in terms of what we've been discussing, it is like there's a lot of utility in terms of like having that flexibility with gender at the very least, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't necessarily, just because you're flexible on one topic, like something like, you know, these gendered boxes that we put ourselves in, doesn't mean you have to be flexible on like moral judgments. For instance.
For
Or like, but I think like what ends up happening is like these categorizations get transferred over across different spheres, right? Like if we're looking at, like, I think there's, you know, we were talking about the dimensionality of gender, right? And I think oftentimes people relate that to other positions. It's like, well, if you're here on the gender axis, then you're also here on the political axis. Right? Like they get equated. When that's not necessarily the case.
Exactly. Let's like take, for example, like, oh my God, what's her name? Caitlyn Jenner.
Exactly.
Like fully against gay marriage. And I'm like, hey, bestie, how? You know, but then it's like, just because you're one thing doesn't necessarily mean you agree with every single other person in that group, you know? Like, obviously a lot of trans people are very inclusive people because they have to deal with so much shit. I mean, I can't say for me, like I'm a very privileged person being, you know, white and like living in Quebec, like a pretty accepting to white people, you know, it's like I don't have to deal with that as much, but like, so the people around me are like very similar in my views, whereas other people are not necessarily like that, you know? And like even with my age, like trans people that are around my age all kind of have the same views. You don't really see very many like conservative trans people, obviously, kind of thing, but obviously to me. But there are people like that, so we can't say that if you're in one or the other, you know, correlation does not equal causation.
Exactly. Like I think that there's like if we're considering like in terms of a dimensionality, I would say like there's, you know, these little pocket universes that make up everybody, right? Like one pocket universe is like the dimensionality of gender, and then the dimensionality of politicism, right? And like those all end up going in to make up people because they're so complex. And I think that that's like an important aspect of reducing divisions is to note that like although these things connect with each other, they're not the same. Right? Like and that comes down to like those oversimplifications, I think often get used as a tool to like, all right, this is like who we are and this is the enemy sort of thing, right?
Exactly.
And like people like Caitlyn Jenner, for instance, who's like go against those sort of group expectations
Yeah.
often become like pariahs, right? And I think it's like there's an issue there of like not considering the complexity, or not like wanting to band together over like one aspect of ourselves, and that should unite everybody, and that just leads to expectations that are going to get disappointed.
Exactly.
It's like a
it's
relationship.
black and white again,
right?
It's that black and white, one end or the other, which is so flat and linear, whereas like a human being in itself is not like that, let alone a society in general. I don't see a way of fixing that though.
I think it's like a deeply enmeshed problem, right? Like there is this. I think that the best way that I can see like going about something like that is to acknowledge that like, okay, we might unite over this one thing, but we don't have to unite over everything.
You have to agree
right?
on
Like,
everything.
Not everyone has to overlap in all of the same ways, and they're like, if you're taking action towards a cause, for instance, regardless of like, let's say trans rights, for instance, like not everyone who is involved in that cause has to have any similar views about anything outside of that, right? But I think it does get complicated when people are like too different and involved in the same single cause, right? Because there has to be aspects of relatability in groups. But then I think the demonization of people who are outside of that group,
Insane.
becomes like a major issue. And like, when in reality, even if someone's opposed to what you're opposed to, they're not like subhuman. Right? I think that's like, because we're never going to be able to get away from like some level of having to make these distinctions. But I think like, the consideration of people as, fellow human beings, regardless of their views on anything, is like super important.
Exactly. Like I don't see people who are transphobic as like subhuman. Yeah, okay, they suck when it comes to that kind of thing, but I don't think they're necessarily like the spawn of the devil. I'm just like, okay, whatever. You live in your own lane, I live in my own. It's like that's just the way it is. It's interesting to unite over one thing and like be so against something else. Like even when you take into like the freedom convoy thing going on right now, like that is like people are uniting over one cause, and then it's like, but a bunch of them are Nazis. So it's like it's finding that is that fine line of like, when is it too far? So it's a big old can of worms there.
Big old can of worms.
Big old can of worms to deal with that kind of shit.
But that's not the topic of our presentation.
I know. I'm sorry. I got a little.
But I highly enjoyed our little, a little
shenanigans,
our little adventure off to the side, so to speak. And I hope the audience enjoys it too.
The besties out there.
Like, follow, subscribe. But I think there's, to sort of segue into our final topic of the night, which would be internet culture and mental health. I think that the sort of like boxes that we're talking about feed in quite a bit to internet culture, both in the role that they help create these boxes, right? Because the internet is so like been so important in terms of establishing, both the fluidity of people in terms of giving them like platforms to learn about new things, and like change themselves based on that, like, new information they're getting, but also creating these like boxes that like, if you go outside of, you're going to be persecuted by the community. Right?
For sure. I mean, an example that comes to mind is like on Snapchat recently. I've seen a bunch of videos on those like little explore thingies. That's like people who transitioned and then detransitioned because they realized that they weren't actually trans, And it's like, this is the only stories you're going to see about trans people. So like a young trans person seeing that might be like, oh shit, I'm making the wrong choice here. This is going to be a mistake, But then on the other hand, like, I think back to me as a kid on Tumblr at a young age that I should not have been on Tumblr, first of all. But, like, seeing all these communities and people being like, you can be whatever you want. You can be trans. You can do this, whatever. And, like, that giving me kind of, like, inspiration and hope that, like, I can someday be who I want to be, you know? So it's, like, it's that duality of it, of, like, yes, you can create these, like, beautiful communities where there's, like, so much love and support. And then there's, like, 4chan.
Yeah.
You know, it's like there's these huge sides to it. And when it comes to, like, mental health, especially, it's like, in, like, trans issues too, it's very difficult to deal with on its own, being trans. And a lot of trans people have underlying mental health issues, for sure. And then you go online, you see this shit, and it's like when I saw that transition thing, like, I was freaking out. You know, because I'm like, oh shit, I'm making a mistake here. Or I'm getting angry because it's like, this is what people are seeing as trans people when they're not trans people, you know? So it's like, it's hard to navigate through, you know? I don't know. It's
a minefield.
It truly is, because you can find so much lovely things online. And then you can find so much shit. Oh my God. So much terrible stuff going on there, you know? And it's like it's about finding the community that's welcoming for you. You know, that's what the important thing of navigating online, especially like with mental health and stuff. Like, I know for me, I had to get rid of TikTok because it was so bad for mental health, you know, because it was just like, just the fact of just scrolling for hours and doing nothing, you know, and like seeing all these people who I'm like, I want to be them, you know, they look so much better than I do, and all these like negative things going on that like, I couldn't handle that anymore. And like, for me personally, I had to get rid of it, you know? And it's like drawing that line of like, what is constructive and what is detrimental to my mental health, you know? Finding that difference, you know? It's important.
And it is like, it's weird because there's an affirming aspect. Like, let's take like memes, for instance. Like memes about like, you know, mental illness. There's an affirming aspect to that in terms of, it's like, oh, I can relate to this person.
Yeah.
But there's also like, it creates an entrenchment in that like identification, right? Yeah. And I think for when stuff like, there's like a danger to over identification just as much as there is to under identification, right?
Like, for sure.
Like we were talking about before, like there's belonging to these groups is important because it facilitates connection and like self-understanding and understanding of others and how you relate, right? But then there's like an over-reliance on that point of similarity, like because people change so much, can like create that like imposter syndrome kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And like when something appears like contrary, you know, to that. And I think there's like a lot of weight on the internet in terms of like algorithms and that kind of thing, like to contrarian like thought, right? Yeah. Because it gets people like engaged.
Yeah.
There's like an automatic connection to like anything that sucks you into the platform more is going to get more attention from the platform system, right?
Exactly.
Because it wants people to get sucked in.
Exactly.
It's good for business.
Exactly. It's a business. It's capitalism.
It's capitalism.
It's capitalism.
It's capitalism, guys.
Yeah.
We solved the internet.
We solved it all. We are big brains.
Big brain.
So many wrinkles on my brain.
And that's like an issue that's difficult for, like, I'm a capitalist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know.
We know.
But
it's like an issue that's difficult for me to parse, right? Because it's like, on one hand, like, you make it the money.
Yeah.
But then it's also like, you do the harm.
Yeah.
So there's, I don't know, it's one of those issues where I think, you know, the ability for people to let go of things that are harmful to them is really important, you know? And like when people get like latched onto those identifications, whether it's like with a specific community or with like a mental illness, like depression or something like that, when you over attach yourself to something like that, or like even just a social media platform, when you become like I feel bad for people who get like, you know, famous on something.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh shit, now I'm obligated to be a part of this forever, right?
Sure.
And I think that's like a big issue, like to like put these restrictions on yourself that you can't be fluid and remove yourself from a situation, or like you become dependent on this identifier, or like dependent on this community, right? Like that's just another form of inflexibility that like you were saying, like when you're not flexible, you break.
Yeah.
And I think it's like it's not to be taken for granted that like you can move between things, you know, and take yourself out of a situation that's not helping you.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the only sort of solution that I could see to that kind of thing is like being, you know, that willingness to accept change, right? And like I think, you know, this idea that like we are who we are permanently is like so toxic.
Oh, so toxic. Yeah.
And I think it's like,
and social media promotes that for sure.
And it does, because it wants people to be, you know, like social media, the internet, it wants people to be in these camps because those fuel engagement.
Yeah, it's predictable. Right? It's very predictable when people are doing that, you know?
Exactly. And like that's like the biggest thing. I think, you know, remaining unpredictable in the internet age.
You never know my next move.
They never know your next move.
Exactly.
That's the key.
Yeah. And go ahead.
And I was just gonna say that like applying that to real life too is like for me, like personally, like allowing myself to let go of my identification with you know, like my mental illness, right? Or like the problems that I was having.
Yeah.
Like, you know, putting myself as like I'm an emo boy. You know, like I'm emo. I do drugs.
Yeah.
I fucking am sad.
Yeah.
Like
separating yourself from that is difficult.
Letting go of that was hard, but it ultimately like allowing yourself to be unpredictable too ends up like opening avenues for so much positive change, because you never know when like another form of being is going to be beneficial to you.
Exactly.
Right? And yeah.
Well, it's even like I put so much emphasis on myself as being like, oh, I'm just mentally ill. I just have this, you know? But like when it came, like in high school, one of my friends was more like, I could tell that she was very mentally ill. And because of that, I was like, I'm not mentally ill enough, you know? And that is very prevalent on social media and stuff, where it's like, this person clearly has it so much worse than me. Therefore, I can't be in the same diagnoses, for example, or like overplaying that mental illness. You know, it's very harmful and very toxic, because it's like it's almost forcing people out of the identification. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's still a thing, you know. And it's like, I know for me, it took me a very long time to realize that it's like, I'm not just someone who has depression and who has this, you know, like I'm me, and I happen to have these, and it doesn't define me as a person, you know. And it's like stepping out of that box and making it no longer a defining factor of myself, you know. And being online is also a very hard thing to navigate, because like even on my TikTok, it was like the algorithm just sent me mentally ill and gay. And that was it.
That's
you know?
who you were.
And that's who I
algorithm.
was. And I was like eating that shit up. I was like, oh fuck yeah, this is so good. Like,
because it fuels that sense of like, I am a part of something.
I'm a part of this, you know. Like there was a TikTok, and it was like, school really be hitting hard, might go take a grippy socks holiday, you know, like going to the psych ward, you know. And I was like, this is funny, but it's like, this is harmful. Yeah. Because like this shit is serious, that I can't just be joking about it, you know. Like I remember a long time ago on Visco, I reposted a picture that said, I want to get high and kill myself. And I thought it was funny because it was a screenshot from Tumblr on Visco, and that was the funniest shit to me. So I reposted it, and then my cousins saw that and called my mom, and then I was like in deep shit, you know. But it's like, I was promoting this thing online that was super unhealthy for everybody involved, you know. Like if someone saw that, they worry about me. If I'm posting this, I'm clearly not in a good mindset to be like doing that, you know. So it's like, it's separating, certain things shouldn't be online. You know, I mean, obviously there's always going to be shit online, but like for me, for my own like mental health, I had to separate my mental illness from online activity because I can't be fed all this information and all this content of like mental health issues because it fuels my depression by itself, you know, and that's super dangerous, you know. And it's like what you were saying, like just like moving on that from that mindset of like I'm a person who is sad, emo, I do drugs, I do this, whatever, and then getting past that and being like, now what? Now who am I? I don't have these things anymore, or I don't want to identify with these anymore. And then you're just like, you're empty because you're like, now what? Who am I then without these traits that are in the end super toxic to identify with, you know? And that's what's scary for a lot of people, I think, where like separating themselves from those toxic identifiers that don't need to be identifiers for yourself, you know, and like embracing the positivity of it, you know? I mean, I can't say I'm perfect when doing that. No one is, you know, but like just being aware of that and like working towards a more positive outlook on things.
And promoting that, like, I feel like that's the biggest like constructive thing is like promoting that ability to like, you know, have that willingness to separate yourselves from those. Like, you don't need to, you know, to identify yourself with like, you know, other people in that sense to have a sense of self, right? Yeah. Like, I think, I don't know, I've been thinking about this a lot in my own life, like trying to move away from like comparing myself to others and comparing myself to like, you know, my past self or like my sort of vision of the future, right? Like, it's like, who was I and who do I want to be and where am I at now? And making that like my main point of comparison. It's like, I feel a lot better when I'm doing that than when I'm like comparing myself to others. It's like, well, I look at like this person and it's like, well, maybe they're a role model to me and I want to, you know, be like them, but like right now I'm not like them, so I'm worse than them, and like I'm lower in this like hierarchy.
It's unattainable almost.
Right? And then it becomes like, you said like that sort of perspective on other people like creates idealized versions of people. Like, this person's below me, this person's above me, I'm here. Yeah. And I need to move up, right? But like, I feel a lot healthier and like better about myself when it's like, all right, you know, past me like 2 years ago
was a shit show.
Was a shit show. Me today, maybe I'm not where I want to be, like this perfected version of myself, and that's okay.
You'll never attain that.
And I'll never attain that. But like moving towards that rather than moving towards, you know, some idealized version of another person.
Because you only see their outside, right?
You only see their outside and the identifiers that you give to them, like the boxes you put them in, right?
Exactly.
Whereas like yourself, you like, I think if you look at yourself long enough, you'll see the shifts, right? Like, you know, you can put other people in boxes, but you can never really put yourself in a box, right? No. Because there's so much uncertainty. Yeah. It's like, I don't really know what I'm feeling at any given time, right? Until I sort of like sort that out and take some time. And even then it's like, well, there's these little holes. They're like, you know, I have to just eventually come to a conclusion of like, okay, this is how I was. This is like how I am right now. And like this
today, this is how I'm feeling.
Exactly.
Whereas tomorrow I might not be like that, you know? Just for today.
Just for today. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's like maybe we should close on that.
I think that's a good happy note to close on.
I think that's a good happy note to close on.
Work on yourself, drink some water, go outside, touch some grass.
Take yourself out of that box.
Take yourself out of that box.
But put that stick in the box. Roddy Ricch.
I don't know. I don't know.
You don't know that song?
I feel like I might, but I have no idea.
It's a classic.
Okay, I probably know it then.
You definitely know it.
But wait, I think
had to put my stick in the box. Yeah.
Yes, I didn't know that's what he said.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Okay.
He's talking about putting his dick in vagine.
This is a kid-friendly podcast.
This is getting cut out. We're gonna end it on this like, I think we'll end it on that good happy.
Podcast 1 done.